You see, Wendy, when the first baby laughed for the first time, its laugh broke into 1,000 pieces, and they all went skipping about, and that was the beginning of fairies. Tedious talk, this, but being a stay-at-home, she liked it. And so he went on good-naturedly. There ought to be one fairy for every boy and girl. Ought to be. Isn't there? No. You see, children know such a lot now. They soon don't believe in fairies. And every time a child says, "I don't believe in fairies," there is a fairy somewhere that falls down dead. Really, he thought they had now talked enough about fairies, and it struck him that Tinker Bell was keeping very quiet. "I can't think where she has gone to," he said, rising, and he called Tink by name. Wendy's heart went flutter with a sudden thrill. "Peter," she cried, clutching him, "you don't mean to tell me that there is a fairy in this room?" "She was here just now," he said a little impatiently. "You don't hear her, do you?" And they both listened. "The only sound I hear," said Wendy, "is like a tinkle of bells." "Well, that's Tink. That's the fairy language. I think I hear her too." The sound came from the chest of drawers, and Peter made a merry face. No one could ever look quite so merry as Peter, and the loveliest of gurgles was his laugh. He had his first laugh still. "Wendy," he whispered gleefully, "I do believe I shut her up in the drawer." He let poor Tink out of the drawer, and she flew about the nursery screaming with fury. "You shouldn't say such things," Peter retorted. "Of course I'm very sorry, but how could I know you were in the drawer?" Wendy was not listening to him. "Oh, Peter," she cried, "if she would only stand still and let me see her." "They hardly ever stand still," he said, but for one moment Wendy saw the romantic figure come to rest on a clock. "Oh, the lovely," she cried, though Tink's face was still distorted with passion. "Tink," said Peter amiably, "this lady says she wishes you were her fairy." Tinker Bell answered insolently. "What does she say, Peter?" He had to translate. "She is not very polite. She says you are a great ugly girl and that she is my fairy." He tried to argue with Tink. "You know you can't be my fairy, Tink, because I am a gentleman and you are a lady." To this Tink replied in these words, "You silly boy," and disappeared into the bathroom. "She is quite a common fairy," Peter explained apologetically. "She is called Tinker Bell and she mends the pots and kettles." They were together in the armchair by this time, and Wendy plied him with more questions. "If you don't live in Kensington Gardens now—" "Sometimes I do still. But where do you live mostly now?" "With the Lost Boys." "Who are they?" "They are the children who fall out of their perambulators when the nurse is looking the other way. If they are not claimed in 7 days, they are sent far away to Neverland to defray expenses. I'm captain." "What fun it must be." "Yes," said cunning Peter, "but we are rather lonely. You see, we have no female companionship." "Are none of the others girls?" "Oh no, girls you know are much too clever to fall out of their prams." This flattered Wendy immensely. "I think," she said, "it is perfectly lovely the way you talk about girls. John there just despises us." For reply, Peter rose and kicked John out of bed, blankets and all, one kick. This seemed to Wendy rather forward for a first meeting, and she told him with spirit that he was not captain in her house. However, John continued to sleep so placidly on the floor that she allowed him to remain there. "And I know you meant to be kind," she said, relenting, "so you may give me a kiss." For the moment she had forgotten his ignorance about kisses. "I thought you would want it back," he said a little bitterly. and offered to return her the thimble. "Oh dear," said the nice Wendy. "I don't mean a kiss, I mean a thimble." "What's that?" "It's like this." She kissed him. "Funny," said Peter gravely. "Now, shall I give you a thimble?" "If you wish to," said Wendy, keeping her head erect this time. Peter thimbled her, and almost immediately she screeched. "What is it, Wendy?" It was exactly as if someone were pulling my hair. That must have been Tink. I never knew her so naughty before. And indeed Tink was darting about again using offensive language. "She says she will do that to you, Wendy, every time I give you a thimble." "But why? Why, Tink?" Again Tink replied, "You silly boy." Peter could not understand why, but Wendy understood. And she was just slightly disappointed when he admitted that he came to the nursery window not to see her, but to listen to stories. "You see, I don't know any stories. None of the lost boys know any stories." "How perfectly awful," Wendy said. "Do you know?" Peter asked. "Why swallows build in the eaves of houses. It is to listen to the stories." "Oh, Wendy, your mother was telling you such a lovely story." "Which story was it?" "About the prince who couldn't find the lady who wore the glass slipper." "Peter," said Wendy excitedly, "that was Cinderella, and he found her, and they lived happily ever after." Peter was so glad that he rose from the floor where they had been sitting and hurried to the window. "Where are you going?" she cried with misgiving. "To tell the other boys." "Don't go, Peter," she entreated. "I know such lots of stories." Those were her precise words. So there can be no denying that it was she who first tempted him. He came back, and there was a greedy look in his eyes now which ought to have alarmed her, but did not. "Oh, the stories I could tell to the boys," she cried. And then Peter gripped her and began to draw her toward the window. "Let me go," she ordered him. "Wendy, do come with me and tell the other boys." Of course she was very pleased to be asked. But she said, "Oh dear, I can't. Think of my mummy. Besides, I can't fly. I'll teach you." "Oh, how lovely to fly. I'll teach you how to jump on the wind's back, and then away we go." "Oh," she exclaimed. "Wendy, Wendy, when you were sleeping in your silly bed, you might be flying about with me saying funny things to the stars." "Oh, and Wendy, there are mermaids." "Mermaids? With tails? Such long tails." "Oh," cried Wendy, "to see a mermaid." He had become frightfully cunning. "Wendy," he said, "how we should all respect you." She was wriggling her body in distress. It was quite as if she were trying to remain on the nursery floor. But he had no pity for her. "Wendy," he said, the sly one, "you could tuck us in at night." "Oh." "None of us has ever been tucked in at night." "Oh," her arms went out to him. "And you could darn our clothes and make pockets for us. None of us has any pockets." How could she resist? "Of course, it's awfully fascinating," she cried. "Peter, would you teach John and Michael to fly too?" "If you like," he said indifferently. And she ran to John and Michael and shook them. "Wake up," she cried. "Peter Pan has come, and he is to teach us to fly." John rubbed his eyes. "Then I shall get up," he said. Of course, he was on the floor already. "Hallo," he said. "I am up." Michael was up by this time also, looking as sharp as a knife with 6 blades and a saw. But Peter suddenly signed silence. Their faces assumed the awful craftiness of children listening for sounds from the grown-up world. All was as still as salt. Then everything was right. No, stop, everything was wrong. Nana, who had been barking distressfully all the evening, was quiet now. It was her silence they had heard. "Out with the light. Hide, quick," cried John, taking command, for the only time throughout the whole adventure. And thus, when Liza entered holding Nana, the nursery seemed quite its old self, very dark, and you would have sworn you heard his 3 wicked inmates breathing angelically as they slept. They were really doing it artfully from behind the window curtains. Liza was in a bad temper, for she was mixing the Christmas puddings in the kitchen, and had been drawn from them with a raisin still in her cheek by Nana's absurd suspicions. She thought the best way of getting a little quiet was to take Nana to the nursery for a moment, but in custody, of course. There, you suspicious brute, she said, not sorry that Nana was in disgrace. They are perfectly safe, aren't they? Every one of the little angels sound asleep in bed. Listen to their gentle breathing. Here Michael, encouraged by his success, breathed so loudly that they were nearly detected. Nana knew that kind of breathing, and she tried to drag herself out of Liza's clutches. But Liza was dense. No more of it, Nana, she said sternly, pulling her out of the room. I warn you, if you bark again, I shall go straight for Master and Mrs. and bring them home from the party. And then, oh, won't Master whip you just?